That was smart. Somebody left.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to wait just a couple minutes to let people trickle in, and then we will get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Novacoast June Critical Vulnerabilities briefing. We will be doing a Q&A at the end, so feel free to write any questions in there or in the chat. I will now be handing it off to Scott.
Hi, guys. Thank you all for joining for this month's installment of the Critical Vulnerability Briefing. As always, I'm Scott, and we'll proceed as we usually do for those who are repeat attendees, but for any new joins, just to outline the briefing objectives. As you guys may well know, or for those of you who have joined in the past, we don't necessarily do a technical deep dive on specific CVEs, exploits, uh, things of that nature. There are plenty of fora for that. What we like to do is give IT security practitioners, folks like ourselves who are actually patching and updating systems, just a quick overview as well as a takeaway of what are the particularly nasty vulnerabilities that should be on our radar, whether that means, whether it affects how we prioritize them at the beginning of a maintenance cycle or at the end of a maintenance cycle. What do we want to make sure is not still popping up in our vulnerability scan results at the end? So that's what we'll do. We'll call out, the worst of the worst, and if and when we see trends associated with particular vulnerabilities or targeted protocols, services, that sort of thing, we'll call those out as well. So I know normally we have this is a week late. We have it. We should have had it last week. However, my apologies, got tickets to a World Cup game. So um, still very relevant though, as this was the largest Patch Tuesday release in Microsoft's history of the Patch Tuesday program. Depending on how you're counting, 198 CVEs with Microsoft as the CNA gets up to 206. I've even seen it a little higher. If you factor in CVEs issued by other CNAs or the handful of vulnerabilities that technically no action has to be taken by folks like ourselves, but they're actually updated on the servicing side, pushed by Microsoft. Um, High volume of criticals. Once again, several months in a row now, where privilege escalation vulnerabilities surpassing code execution, but that gap narrowed quite a bit from previous months, which was somewhat interesting. 6 0 days, only one that made it into the Sisakev catalog, and that was actually an entry from May. But Microsoft's still working on a patch. We'll talk about that Exchange server vulnerability. The other five rate the title 0 day because POC was released prior to Microsoft releasing the patch. So we'll start with those. Um, as you could see here, if you look over on the right-hand side, because we'll get into these a little bit deeper uh, in the next slides, but essentially you'll see three there. Interestingly, I put them all in the white rows, but these are all vulnerabilities: green plasma, yellow key, mini plasma. You probably remember those from if you attended last month's brief or if you've been keeping pace with Nightmare or Chaotic Eclipse, um, whatever whatever moniker you choose to give him. The disgruntled Microsoft former Microsoft employee who's been for the past couple months, releasing 0 days immediately following a Patch Tuesday release. So those vulnerabilities, the yellow key was one of the BitLocker sec feature bypass vulnerabilities. The CTF mom privilege elevation vulnerability, dubbed green plasma. As you can see, both of those were released May 13th. If you recall, last Patch Tuesday was May 12th. And then not too long thereafter, um, there was Nightmare Eclipse did release. Actually, I shouldn't say he released POC for Mini Plasma. It was actually, if you notice, the CVE ID Mini Plasma was actually a vulnerability discovered by Google researchers back in 2020. It was supposedly addressed by Microsoft in December of 2020. However, Nightmare Eclipse did throw the same exploit, same POC that the Google researchers threw when they originally discovered it in 2020. He threw that in May at a fully patched Windows 11 box to include the May cumulative updates and was able to elevate privileges. So either it was a botched patch or the patch got rolled back inadvertently or without Microsoft letting anyone know. That was addressed this June. Two others that do have really cool names: the HTTP denial of service vulnerability, dubbed HTTP2 bomb, and then Bitskrieg, which is another um, BitLocker sec feature bypass vulnerability. Last but not least, you'll see the Exchange server spoofing vulnerability. We'll talk more about that one. That one was added. It's not new this month. You probably recall it from last month, but Microsoft is actually still working on an official fix for that. So really quickly, this is actually an updated slide from last month's presentation with a little bit of history on Nightmare Eclipse, as well as those three vulnerabilities that he disclosed in the case of yellow key and green plasma immediately following Patch Tuesday, and then a couple days later in the case of mini plasma. Um, at the time of release, those did not have CVE IDs issued to them, with the exception of mini plasma. It retained its original CVE from 2020. Yellow key and green plasma did get CVEs assigned, and they are rolled up. The fixes for those are rolled up in the June 2026 Patch Tuesday release. So again, the Nightmare Eclipse and anything he's put out. I know this month, Microsoft or someone had suspended his GitHub account. He's threatened to have some big releases coming in July. Uh, I would certainly pay particular attention to anything that he posts, as it would almost certainly be in the crosshairs of any motivated attacker. All right. And just to round out the list of 0 days, the HTTP2 bomb, there is a mitigation for that. Hopefully, you guys applied that promptly, just while you were testing the patch and before you could roll it out to production. But Microsoft does a good job. There's actually a PowerShell script that walks you through that will actually set or modify the registry setting for the max headers count, and that's going to limit the number of HTTP2 and 3 header requests that are accepted by the server. Um, Certainly, and there actually is another vulnerability for which it's another HTTP sys vulnerability that had a very high CVSS score of 9.8. We'll talk about it in a second, where you're actually not vulnerable if you do have this registry setting. All right. And the last two, Blitzkrieg, again, just like yellow key and green plasma, physical access is required. So I know a lot of folks might, not say turn their head. I would certainly give anything. I know Nightmare Eclipse, he did not take sole responsibility, but he was part of the POC. Um, Releasing it for this particular vulnerability. I would certainly it is a 0 day, um, not because it's under active exploitation, but I would give it the attention that it deserves, despite the moderate CVSS score and the fact that physical access is required. And then last but not least, so the MS Exchange server spoofing vulnerability 42897, as you could see, this was disclosed in early May, made its way into the CysaKev catalog on the 15th. It does require end user interaction in order to execute or for JavaScript to run in the browser, the targeted user's browser context. Um, Microsoft still is working on an official fix for this. However, through the Exchange Emergency Mitigation Service, which you should have enabled by default, they are pushing mitigations. But more on this one to come. This was technically not addressed. Um, I don't believe it is holistically addressed in the June 2026 update. All right. And then last but not least, a couple of the riskier vulnerabilities. They didn't rate the title 0 day. I still think they're worthy of mention. As you can see, if you look at the last two columns, they all have a CVSS score of 9.8. The first one, hey, for all of these, a remote unauthenticated attacker could throw the exploit, um, which makes, obviously relatively easy in all three cases, but high exposure. In the case of the DHCP, it runs on every OS, so it's a it's a pretty enticing target for an attacker. No end user interaction required. Certainly an important one. The HTTP sys, this one, unlike the DOS vulnerability that was a 0 day, this is a code execution vulnerability. Again, no end user interaction required, and it can be exploited remotely without authentication. But in this particular case, if you do set that max request bytes reg setting, um, that will protect you. You are not vulnerable to this specific CVE. And then last but not least, uh, another Win kernel vulnerability. I know we discussed those. There was a pretty significant number addressed in May. Um, it is a ripe target, high impact. If an attacker were to exploit this for particular vulnerability, I wouldn't be surprised if POC was released for this one. So keep those three in the back of your mind. Like I said, you should be working your way through the June maintenance cycle. Probably most of you are in production by now, if not running makeup jobs. But certainly keep these three, check your vulnerability scan results, make sure no instances are outlying. Same thing goes for the 0 days, particularly anything from Nightmare Eclipse. All right, one thing I know this is like beating a dead horse for anyone who's attended one or more of these briefs. I don't think one has gone by where I haven't made some kind of public service announcement about browser updates. Um, they're kind of easy pickings. But I did want to just point out a trend that I know, at least I hope, hasn't escaped anyone's attention, and that is obviously folks who sit in our seat, the folks to whom we answer with, C in their title. Uh, Everyone is running around with their hair on fire over Mythos and just the massive increase in just the sheer volume of CVEs that are being addressed in different vendors' products. Um, in this case, I wanted to beat the drum again for, if you don't already do so, automating your browser updates. I picked Chrome as an example. Chrome, obviously, Chromium based. You could, the numbers for Microsoft Edge are very similar. Firefox released just as many versions in this past month alone. They are generally not as CVE heavy, but I did just want to point out if you look at the number of CVEs addressed per version, and then the release dates. Um, if you're not updating your browser to the current version in as timely a manner as possible, that is to say, you have some automation in place where as soon as the vendor releases a new version, your tooling is looking for any system not running that version of the browser and updating it. I understand this can be a little painful for the end user experience. I don't care too much about that. In this particular case, I would prioritize the security requirement. And then just, I know everyone lurking in the back of everyone's mind is, what can we do to keep up with this, huge uptick in cumulative CVEs that are discovered via AI? So, hey, a quick, easy place to start. You don't have to reboot systems. Uh, at this stage, you probably shouldn't be running any critical enterprise applications that are tethered to a specific browser version. Um, most people are worried about what will it do to certain users' browser extensions. Well, browser extensions are pretty nice attack vector in and of themselves. Probably shouldn't allow them. But I think it's a helpful chart, um, just to put things in perspective and find little ways that we can, hey, like I said, hopefully keep pace. There are a lot of other things we can do on the cyber hygiene side. Um, this is one of them, and June happened to be a particularly stark example of just, hey, take the number of CVEs, the speed with which these versions are coming out, multiply it by every endpoint in your environment that's running Chrome, Edge, what have you, and all of a sudden you're dealing with real numbers. Getting those numbers down as quickly as possible is never going to hurt you. And then last but not least, another item that I hope caught everyone's attention, but I did want to bring it up as I'm working with some customers right now to incorporate this CISA's guidance per its binding operational directive 2604 into their sort of risk prioritization methodology. So for those of you who hadn't caught it, June 10th, CISA published BOD 2604, the title of which, Prioritizing Security Updates Based on Risk, is right up there. The goal, uh, you know, I'm sure just about everyone on this call, within their enterprise, there is some mechanism, some methodology you employ that helps you identify the vulnerabilities that pose the greatest risk to your organization, fix those first, and then maybe a less stringent SLA or a deferred action to those that don't. Um, like most of those paradigms, this too is looking at both the the assets, the criticality of the assets that the vulnerabilities affect, as well as some of the characteristics of the vulnerabilities. So, very simply, on the asset side, how exposed are we? Is it public facing? Is it in the DMZ? Is it on the perimeter? Yes or no? CySACAV status. Is it in the catalog? Is it under active exploitation right now, this day? Yes or no? And then the other two um, are, I'm not going to say unique, but most vulnerability management tooling, like vulnerability scanners, are not going to, uh, by default, have data fields for these. And that is an attacker able to automate an exploit against the vulnerability? Yes or no? And then what is the impact of successful exploitation? Full control of a system or partial control? And that manifests itself in different SLA recommendations based on how the answers to those critical, those four criteria essentially. Now, I know at least for some of my customers, at least the ones who aren't quite as mature, there's, you know, a lot more red tape that goes into, security, triaging and assessing the risk of a vulnerability, handing that over to IT ops to assess the feasibility of the remediation in accordance with an SLA, uh, going through change control, that sort of thing. But take the right hand side. I mean, it's tough to argue with guidance from CISA, but certainly you can modify those remediation timelines based on your organization's risk threshold. Um, but I do like, and I have it here in table version. Um, I think the methodology is sound in terms of, if you were to take these, and that's actually, let me just go back real quickly. For those of you who haven't read the BOD in its entirety, you go to the link that I have here at the bottom. Obviously, you're not going to click on that, but just look for the BOD. When you get down to the sections of, the actual workflow as well as the table, the corresponding table, uh, you are able to click to their vulnrichment, CISA's vulnrichment library and GitHub, where you are able to import the automatable by adversary and technical impact data fields. Um, so we have some customers, we're doing some cool things right now, bringing those into Power BI and sifting through cumulative vulnerabilities and assigning them essentially a numerical value that corresponds to the leftmost column. So, hey, how many ones are in the environment all the way down the list to give a little additional context to cumulative vulnerabilities in the environment. How many of them do we really need to worry about? What slipped through the cracks? Why? Where do we need to tighten up? Um, in terms of, how does this align with the sort of proprietary vulnerability prioritization mechanisms that a lot of your major vendors have? How does it stack up against Tenable's VPR? How does it compare against Qualys's True Risk? Things like that. And it's offered some pretty interesting insights. So I did want to point that out. Like I said, I hope you guys, this was on your radar anyway. But if not, I think it's a worthwhile read, and hopefully you could find some value into incorporating it into your prioritization paradigms. All right, that was all I had. If there are questions, feel free to ask, or certainly feel free to reach out over email. Um, as always, Uh, Feel free to reach out over email to provide feedback, as well as if you would like a PDF copy or a little cheat sheet from today's brief that has all the CVE information. By all means, hit up Caitlin and hit me up, and we could certainly get that to you. Aside from that, I'll turn it over to questions, and I hope to see you guys next month.
All right. If no one has any questions, then thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Our team will send out the slides and the recording soon. Thank you so much.